That was from the trailer for Midsommar, the newest film by Ari Aster. And I'm just going to read the plot summary for the film from IMDb. A couple travels to Sweden to visit a rural hometown's fabled Midsummer Festival. What begins as an idyllic retreat quickly devolves into an increasingly violent and bizarre competition at the hands of a pagan cult. This is a Slash Filmcast, and joining us for our review of Midsommar today, she is a freelance film critic and screenwriter. Her work has appeared in Harper's Bazaar, The Mary Sue, The Playlist, and The Hollywood Reporter. Valerie Complex, welcome to the Slash Filmcast. Valerie, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good. Thank you for having me. Been a fan of Slash Film for a while, so this is a true honor.
Well, it's
Nice.
great. It's great to have you on. Really appreciate you joining us. And before we begin with our review of Midsommar, maybe it's a good place to start by talking about what our thoughts were on Ari Aster's last movie, Hereditary. Were you a fan of Hereditary, the 2018 film starring Toni Collette?
Well, I just want to say I love you, Ari, but I was not a huge fan of Hereditary.
Uh-huh.
I think one of the things that Midsummer gets right is exactly what Hereditary gets wrong, at least to me. I think it's really well done, really well shot. It's a technically advanced horror film, but the story is like meh. I remember sitting in the theater having some harsh thoughts about the film. So I like Midsummer a lot more.
I think my challenge with Hereditary, and we'll try not to do too many spoilers for Hereditary here, but that to me, Hereditary started as a really interesting psychological thriller, and then veered into this kind of supernatural thriller that I just found to be much less interesting, or at least less interestingly executed than the psychological aspects of that movie were. So
That's exactly my opinion as well.
hmm
That's exactly what it was like. It was like two different films, and
hmm
the
yeah,
necromancy aspect is cool, but it's not something that was explored. It was seemed like it was just tacked on at the last minute. So
Hmm. Yeah, whereas I feel like whatever Midsummer is, it fully embraces whatever it is. You know what I mean? Like, there's no
Whatever it is,
it
yeah.
does not feel like two movies, mashed together as Hereditary did. Like, this feels like full bore. Devindra, remind us of your thoughts on Hereditary before we dive into Midsummer.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think I liked it much more than you both did. I think, I could totally see having issues with how that movie just feels like two separate things. To me, it was interesting how like that's bold as hell, just shoving a straight up like witchcraft and magic stuff happening towards the end. And I saw the film like reflected. I saw the psychological drama kind of reflected through that later on. It didn't, it didn't like perfectly fit, but I think the chutzpah of it is pretty astounding, and I think it worked really well for me. Whereas this movie didn't quite hit that for me.
Hmm. Interesting. All right.
one of the things that I find about Ari Aster's films, both of them, is that there's like an underlying queer element there.
hmm
Queerness, for folks that are listening, doesn't just mean like anything having to do with LGBTQ. Sometimes queerness can denote like finding a sense of community in an unexpected place.
hmm
And many LGBTQ folks go through that sort of looking for and seeking out community, and both films do that. And I don't know if Ari Aster is aware that he's doing it or what. I find that
hmm
element to be the most interesting about both his films.
I think yeah,
Interesting.
both of them. It's that sort of seeking community, but also like seeking the permission to be loved in a way when the people who are supposed to love you kind of don't. And like that's it. Repeated again here.
Well, there's a lot to dive into in Midsummer, particularly in spoilers. But before we get to spoilers, Valerie, you want to just share with us your overall thoughts on Midsummer? Like, what did you think of this movie? Like, what was your reaction walking out of the theater?
I think my reaction walking out of the theater is I had a lot more, I just had a lot more thoughts because I was unpacking the film. I think coming out of it, I thought that it was really well done and it was well shot. a film that takes place during the day, I think I would normally find annoying because it's so bright. Oh, my eyes, I'm going blind, whatever. I have a whole bunch of like complaints. But this one was like really, and the cinematographer, they really work well together. The acting by Florence Pugh is on 10. She's like one of the best criers in Hollywood. And I'm just going to tell you right now.
Mm-hmm.
She can cry her ass off. And I mean, it's like this guttural thing where you really feel the emotions that
I think they
feeling.
pretty much captured that for the poster too, right? Like that is the poster. It's just her like smile crying in a weird way.
Almost like, the Greek tragedy face.
Yeah, yeah.
And, I've talked about this at length, but the thing that I thought upon coming out of seeing Midsommar is that it's a lot like Euripides the Bacchae. That's what the first thing I thought about, which is weird, but it had a lot of similarities, and I appreciated that a lot. And I just thought it was kind of creepy with all the gaslighting and stuff. That's what scared me the most. Like these moments where her boyfriend would pretty much gaslight the hell out of her were creepy. They were creepier than anything that happened toward the end.
And also the entire community kind of does too. And I don't know. I just also felt particularly uncomfortable for this like supposedly happy community of of white people trying to really, I don't know, hide the truth about everything that's going on. We know what it is. Like we've all seen The Wicker Man, both of them probably. It's not like it's a surprise, but I found it extra creepy how the movie handled it.
Well, yeah, the whole community is like they might as well call
Yeah.
themselves the gaslighters because that's what they do. And that in and of itself is just scary, and it makes you wonder, like, is she, Danny, the main character, like just vulnerable to the point where she just will accept anything, or do these people really and want to embrace her? That was a question that I had coming out of it.
You mentioned the Bacchae. So this is the Greek tragedy, right, by Euripides. Is there any
Yes.
is there any reason that particular story resonated with you, and like how do you feel like it informs this movie?
Well, the I guess the ancient form of gaslighting. A lot of it is the same. You have this central person in the Bacchae. It's Dionysus, who goes back to Thebes and is like trying to convince this community that he is who he says he is, because his mother is sort of outcast amongst the community for, saying she's given birth to this demigod, and he returns to the town and is like, I am, who I say I am. And what ends up happening is that he drives the women crazy in the town, and in the end, everybody who didn't believe him at first gets their payback, and it sort of works. Midsummer kind of works in the same way. You have this person who's at the center who has a community of disbelievers, who don't believe in who she is, and by the time you get to the end, then what happens.
Yeah.
And I mean, there's a lot more intricate details in there that make them sort of similar, but that's spoilery, which I can talk about later.
Yeah, we'll get to that later. But good reference. Devendra Hardawar, what are your thoughts on Midsommar overall?
I don't think I can like make I can't surpass a Euripides deep cut, right?
Yeah,
like
that's a good
thanks,
Euripides reference there.
I have not thought about that since college. I will say, like, this movie, first of all, we haven't talked about, like, this movie is hilarious. I think this movie is very, very funny, even though it is trying, it is ostensibly a film about a relationship breaking down, a relationship that probably should have stopped existing years ago. It's a really intriguing look at grief, although I think Hereditary kind of handled that better. My main thing, I think there are a lot of great ideas in this movie. I think the imagery is fantastic. Like just sitting there, I saw this late night at BAM in Brooklyn, And I love seeing trippy movies like this late night because like I get into this like almost like half sleepy state where everything is just kind of I don't know, it's like a new dream state of cinema. Kind of worked really well for this movie. I don't think this movie needed to be 2.5 hours long. I think they could have maybe focused a bit on what the movie's trying to say because it feels like it's saying a lot of things. And by the end, things go wild as we kind of expect. But I don't think the thematic resonance of that makes as much sense. To me, it's even more. It's like less impactful than even Hereditary was, whereas the ending of that movie felt like it's just like this weird supernatural thing, and it's all very inevitable. Here, they kind of drag everything out. You kind of know where everything is going, and I was never really surprised by any of it. So even though it was all very, I can understand what it all means, but to me, not a lot of it felt super surprising, especially after Hereditary. People were talking about this movie like, oh man, that imagery from Hereditary, that one shot of that certain head, it's even worse here. And I actually never found that. Like, I never found anything just as disturbing as that like one single shot from Hereditary.
No, it wasn't like they were hyping it up. I mean, people were
Yeah,
really
yeah,
overdoing it. Like,
yeah.
it's a good movie, but it's not all that. Like, the last 20 minutes, and that was a problem I had with Hereditary, is just the last 20 minutes was like, it felt so unnecessary. And it's like, I could have sat there and watched Hereditary and watched this whole family go absolutely nuts over grief without the necromancy. And I could have watched this relationship go
Yeah, yeah.
110% downhill without the cult. And I think it would have been even more impactful to see a horror film about a breakup and how gaslighting is so horrific. Because see, none of that I found funny. Like, I didn't find any of that stuff funny.
Yeah, well, it's certainly not that funny, but the way it is sort of like,
No.
yeah,
There is a lot of comedic moments
yeah,
in it,
yeah.
and I think those are intentional. But I think when I think about the things that they said to each other, like I was just sitting there stone faced, like I can't believe I'm this is the night.
Oh yeah. I got everyone in the theater like that. There's some of those opening scenes. Everyone's like, what a dick. What are you doing, girl?" Like it is. The movie really gets you into that state of mind very quickly. I don't think it ever really leaves that when it comes to like the relationship between her and her boyfriend. I kind of feel like there wasn't as much complexity there as I would have liked either. Like, what did she actually see in this guy? Like we don't even really get to explore that for a movie that's 2.5 hours long. It feels like the broken relationship part of it isn't explored as much. But I will say I like the fact that Ari Aster is doing this weird thing of juxtaposing these two very almost like extreme genres against each other, trying to like mix oil and water and seeing how it like works together. I think sometimes it works really well here. Maybe not as quite, but I still respect I respect what he's doing.
I wonder, do you think if you guys think about his last two movies, what do you think about the male roles? Because somebody pointed out on Twitter that he doesn't develop his male characters as well as the women, and if that's like a personal thing,
Yeah.
by not just connecting to men or connecting more to women, or because there's this theme of female grief, and some look at it as female hysteria. From the last two movies, and I've seen a couple of people express worry about that. I'm just wondering what you think.
So here are my overall thoughts on the movie. Is that like I'll answer your question, Valerie, but let me just get to it in a second by first starting about like what I like about the movie, which is that I think it's many things you both have already pointed out. One is that technically, I think the movie is extremely accomplished. I think that Ari Aster, like from a production design and art direction standpoint, this movie nails this whole feeling of being in this foreign place that you're unfamiliar with, and like the world felt completely well realized. It felt very authentic. At no point did I doubt that this thing could actually exist in the real world, right? And I also love the camera work, which is extremely intricate and very like floaty. Like he will choreograph these extremely complex sequences where the camera like slowly goes from like it's like an overhead shot that dreamily floats from one part of the scene to another, and like lots of things need to occur in that sequence to like convey the feeling that he's going for, which is just generally like unsettled. Like you don't know what is wrong, but there's something not quite right with the scene.
Yeah.
I also think you're right that Florence Pugh is amazing in this movie. I have not seen her in Fighting with My Family, but I've heard she's great in that film as well. Valerie, did you see?
I think the little drummer girl, she's also very good in. Go ahead, Valerie.
Valerie, did you see Fighting with My Family by any chance?
I did, and it's an amazing movie. It's still one of my favorites of this year, and I think a lot of people forgot about it. But I saw like her first film, The Falling, and I saw Lady Macbeth. Like she's just good across the board. Like she's always on 10, and I don't expect anything less from her. Like, you know, when Jennifer Lawrence like took a break, all of these talented actresses really started to come out the woodwork, and I'm just so happy for that. No shade to Jennifer Lawrence right now, but you know, I'm just glad that, you know, she was one of the talents that came out of that. And what I wanted to talk about as far as what I liked is the set design in this film is so detailed and so well researched. Like I was blown away by the way, just, and I know it's like a lot of open space and sun and everything, but like if you like look on the walls when they get to their sleeping quarters, like the entire story is on the wall.
Yeah.
Like the plot is on the wall.
It was very beautiful. I think after a point I was like, when is this too much? Right? Like there's a great camera shot where the camera's just like following some characters and like just sweeping by, you know, like a very long poster that lays out this very very gross sequence of events, I'd say. And then it happens later on in the movie, of course. And I feel like there was no subtlety to that in a way. Like what it depicted is so like it doesn't feel like it would be something you would find in like I don't know, like a weird Swedish cult or something. It felt like almost like something from a graphic novel. It felt a little too modern when we saw it on screen.
But I like the opening mural as well. And the opening mural depicts kind of the events of the film as well. But I agree with you, Valerie, that the world is very beautifully rendered, and there's a lot of attention to detail here. I think you've captured the aspect of this movie that's one of the aspects that's interesting, which is that the whole thing takes place in daylight. It's one of these movies that, like Insomnia, right? The murder thriller Insomnia, that like where daylight is actually an oppressive force, right? And that like somehow it's more terrifying. The movie makes it more terrifying that you can see everything, rather than like hiding everything in darkness, which is what
I will
most
say
horror films
I
do.
did not believe that nobody had sunglasses, or at least not the people coming in. I don't know. That's just me. I would not have survived just standing outside there.
But I want to get back to Valerie's question about the male characters in his films, and particularly in this one. I think for me, the failure of this movie is not I don't conceive of it as how well drawn the male characters are. I think of it more as how poorly established the central relationship of the film is, and I think that's what I have a big problem with. It's not like, oh, the male characters are all like, you know, paper thin sketches, and you know, Florence Pugh's character is really well done. It's that I think that in order for this movie to serve as an effective metaphor for a breakup, which is what a lot of people think of it as, which is what Ari Aster said, like he went through a painful breakup and that's why he made the film, or he was making the film in the progress or in the process of shortly after going through a painful breakup. You know, like for that metaphor to really work for me, I felt like we needed to know more about their relationship. And I did not feel that the movie accomplished that. So that's like my big issue with the movie. It's not about the male characters; it's about the central relationship. Valerie, what did you think of that relationship? Did you find it to be like well fleshed out?
No, it wasn't. But I think I let my emotions for the character take over because this guy and some of his friends were like so over the top. It was like unbelievable. You know, we don't really have the only bit of nuance that we really get about the relationship is when Oh, maybe not. That's a spoiler. Maybe never mind.
Yeah.
That conversation when she's on the phone. Anyway, she's on the phone and she's talking to her friend, and that was like the little bit of nuance that I got that sort of put me in the headspace where this relationship might be.
Right.
But again, that was never expanded upon.
Yeah.
And
I
we come into the relationship with like where we expect his character to do better because she's gone through something.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
We don't see what it's like before. And so, you know, when the conversations comes up about him being abused, like we don't know, like that is an aspect I would have liked to have seen. Like, is that true? Like I had a lot of questions
Right.
about it.
Same.
You know?
Same. Yeah.
So I have a lot of this complaint too. I will say I give the movie a lot of credit for how quickly it establishes, you know, what the deal is, right? Like I would have liked to see more about the relationship, but I think instantly you kind of get the sense of like, oh, she is in crisis. She is dealing with this crazy, you know, family tragedy. He is somebody who wants to be out of there because he's probably been dealing with her doing this for a while. His friends don't believe in their relationship anymore. Like that's all sketched out so quickly that I found kind of fascinating. I just feel like, yeah, it could have gone deeper, especially for something so long.
All right. Well, I think we have much more to discuss in the spoiler section, but it sounds like overall, this panel today is like a little mixed on the film, right? That there's a lot of things we admire about it, but a lot of things that also frustrated about us about the film. Is that accurate, Valerie, or am I mischaracterizing?
I think I liked it a little more because I don't know. I'm just a huge Florence Pugh fan.
Yeah.
And she really carries it. She carries it like up and away. And it's like if it wasn't for her and you know Ari Aster's sort of cinematic experience holding it together, you know, but it's so good that I like am willing to forego a lot of that. But also like in an article, in an interview that I read recently, if I'm correct, Ari Aster had talked about how he focused more on the aesthetic than the plot here, and you can tell.
We can tell, yeah.
Yeah.
Again, I like Ari Aster, and if he's listening, like I feel kind of bad, but like because he's like a really nice guy, and I think he's smart, and I think you know he really has an interesting imagination when it comes to telling these type of stories. And I like the fact that he can take like emotions and create horror movies out of them, like breakup and grief, and you know, I like that. So I think I liked it a little more, but I agree with everything that has been said. Like I have no argument against that.
All right. Well, let's get to spoilers for Midsommar starting right now. So at this point, we play a little spoiler music. And from this point on, you can talk about anything in the movie. So, you know, earlier in this review, we talked about how, like, this movie to me felt like it committed fully to its supernatural premise right from the top. You know, like, I never
It wasn't
felt,
hiding it.
It wasn't
all.
hiding it, you know, very much in keeping with the spirit of being in daylight most of the time. One of the things that frustrated me about the movie, though, is that even though it fully commits to that premise, it really starts as one kind of movie and does end as another kind of movie stylistically, not thematically, right? But stylistically, I felt like, oh, I kind of get where this is going. This is like a kind of classic folk horror movie. The people are eliminated one by one. And about an hour and 45 minutes into this movie, you realize that the writer-director is not at all interested in that kind of movie. Like, he doesn't... There is some thrill in terms of figuring out, like, the plot mechanics. Like, oh my God, when are they going to discover that so-and-so has died? You know, what's going to happen with so-and-so? Like, there's some of that, which is what you'd normally expect in a movie of this kind. But that takes complete backseat to all the stuff that goes on with Florence Pugh's character later on in the movie, and he's just like not interested in making a conventional film. And I think a lot of people will love this movie for that, right? It is so unlike other folk horror movies in terms of its feel and in terms of its pacing. But for me, I found it to be a little bit frustrating. So I don't know what y'all think of the ending. You know what, a good place to start might be this email that we received at /filmcast@gmail.com from Alexi from Boise, Idaho. And I want to hear what you all think of this. Alexi writes into /filmcast@gmail.com. She wrote this in when Midsommar was released. She said, "Happy Midsommar release day. In honor of the sheer miracle that this movie even got made, I want to share some thoughts on how Ari Aster depicts grief in his movies. For some context, my dad died when I was 19. We lived 1,300 miles away from each other, and he died very suddenly. I'd just seen him 2 weeks prior, and nothing had been noticeably wrong. Ari Aster is obviously interested in grief, its depiction on screen, and the effects it has on his characters. In Hereditary, after Charlie dies, we see Annie rocking back and forth on the floor, sobbing and screaming, while her husband holds her silently. In Midsommar, we see Danny reacting to the death of her entire family in a similar way, letting out guttural sobs on her tiny sofa while Christian holds her silently. Sometimes that's all a partner can do in these situations, and those scenes affected me strongly because they are mirror images of the night I found out my dad had died. But Midsommar takes this a step further. Do you feel held by him, is what Pell asks Danny of her relationship with Christian. Judging by her reaction and what we've seen of their interactions up until that point, her answer is no. In Midsommar's third act, when Danny witnesses Christian's participation in Maja's sexual ritual, she realizes she has lost yet another person in her life, and though Christian is not yet dead, she reacts with grief. What's different this time is the community of women around her. This time, when she starts sobbing, others sob with her. When she screams, they scream. They mirror her breaths and stroke her hair and hold her right side up. It's strange to watch, but it struck me as the ideal support I would want in a time of extreme trauma. Danny's no longer alone. She's held. By nature, grief is isolating. It has a peculiar way of making you feel as if no one could possibly understand nor shoulder your burden. Grief sucks, but Ari used such a strange situation to create what seems like the ideal way I'd want my partner to grieve with me. Perhaps in reality it wouldn't have the same effect, but seeing the depiction on screen struck me as deeply moving and accurate, and I wonder if others felt the same way," end quote. So, Valerie, I think this kind of goes to what you were saying earlier about community, right? And that, like, at the end of this movie, Danny kind of has found this community of women who are able to empathize with her and kind of embrace her. What did you think of the movie's depiction of grief? Like, did you find that resonated with you?
The message of grief, it's hard to say if that resonated with me. I definitely felt something, and I felt for Danny, but I didn't internalize it because I felt it to be so over the top that I didn't connect with it in that way. But she mentions that element of queerness, right? How we find communities that accept us and hold us up. And if you notice throughout the film, like, Danny is the only one who never questions the tradition that of this group. She's very accepting. And even when the two elderly people sacrifice themselves or whatever, she's the only one that doesn't have a big reaction.
She just kind of goes blank. Yeah.
She just kind of goes blank to it. And I don't know if that's a grief thing or if that's just an acceptance thing. Like, even after two people died, she was still willing to stay. And when she was talking to Pell about leaving, she wasn't even talking about leaving in the sense of what she saw. She was talking about leaving because I think she could feel her and Christian weren't going to work out. And if she stayed in that relationship, she would somehow end up like this woman who sacrificed herself, at the end of her life. Because, as they talk about, like, we sacrifice ourselves before, we can get any older, before things spoil or whatever. And I think when that resonated with Danny, and she was like, I don't want to be in this relationship anymore before I go spoiled or whatever. So by the time, she's doing all of these initiation processes after she wins May Queen, she already knows the language. She already knows what's going on. And she's things, it's easier for her to assimilate because that's a place where she belonged. And I think that that's kind of given away at the beginning. when they first arrive. Um, she's the only one who didn't have any complaints, didn't have anything to say.
Mhm.
Um, and a lot of that sort of reminds me of the Bake again. You know, the people who uh, end up sort of surviving this chaos, this madness, because Dionysus drives everybody insane, is the people who sort of embraced him right away. Um, and so I think that that's the interesting part in terms of like the film, but I can't really say that I super connected with the message of grief there. I connected more with it in Hereditary because for some reason it just seemed more realistic to me. Um, that's just where I'm at.
Yeah.
Devindra, any thoughts on like? I guess a general question is what themes of the movie most resonated with you, Devindra? You know, I feel like Valerie's done a good job of articulating this idea of like community.
Mhm.
As you're coming away from the movie, what is your reaction to the film? Like, what do you feel like it's trying to say to you?
Yeah, I think, the big takeaway too, you have the exploration of grief, but you also have the exploration of a relationship that's sort of dying and a relationship that she probably knows she shouldn't be in, but she can't leave it either. It's this weird sort of awkwardness, where, that whole conversation where after the party at the beginning of the movie and they have this thing where she's mad at him kind of for not telling her about this trip, and it's a total dick move on his part. And that whole scene is fascinating because it goes from her having a legitimate issue with how he's treating her, and he turns it around by being a whiny little dude. He somehow turns it around on her so that she's the bad person, and then she ends up apologizing to him. I think those explorations, like of how dysfunctional this relationship is and how I don't think either of them really wants to be in it, but it's probably the last thing Danny has to really hold on to. So she's, grasping onto it for dear life. I find all that really fascinating, and that's a big run through the entire film. And certainly you could read a lot. Like grief is a great allegory throughout all of this too. It just feels like he's trying to mishmash a couple themes into one thing, whereas I think if we didn't have the really like crazy over the top uh, uh, terrible thing that happens to her family, like it's not just that her family dies, it's that her sister, who's been like vaguely suicidal for a while, leaves a final note, leaves her distraught, kills herself, and takes her parents too in this like elaborate asphyxiation scheme. It's horrifying. It's completely horrifying, and the movie kind of sets it up that way. um I feel like, Ari Aster just he swings big. It's sort of like, the freaking decapitated head from Hereditary. That's a big swing. It's kind of things you don't really see, projected 50 feet in front of you in a crowd of strangers. Like that's kind of what he's forcing us to confront. So I don't know. I feel like maybe the fact that the movie starts like that kind of takes away from like what the really interesting ways it could have explored relationships. I will say it is fascinating he made this movie at all, because listening to some interviews with him, like dude was working on this movie, like he started production pretty much as Hereditary was getting released. He really didn't even get to like absorb the critical reception of Hereditary because he was deep into this movie. So it is fascinating to me. Like he is on fire. Like he's just gonna work hard, I guess, as far as he can. I can understand that impulse to just like get your thoughts, get your feelings out there. A lot of this movie does feel like he's in his feelings, as the kids would say.
One thing I did want to call out. Yeah, go ahead, Valerie.
I'm sorry. Can I piggyback on that? Like
Please.
you brought up some really great things, Javindra, and one of the things that I found that kind of took me out of the movie at the very beginning was when they talk about her sister, and she's labeled as bipolar,
Right.
Yeah.
and she's just, she's labeled as like the main or one of the main gaslighters of Danny, because it's like, oh, she plays this game all the time, like, oh, she's just luring you into some of her whatever. And it's like, that's a really mean depiction of someone with mental illness, because that, that can happen, but the probability of it is, that's there's already a negative stigma around mental illness. So I just wish that that would have been handled better. Then okay, so you have this bipolar girl who does puts this elaborate scheme with hoses and whatever, and takes it all the way upstairs, and it was just sort of weird. But I think one of the most fascinating things is all of the gaslighting. And for those who don't know what gaslighting is I don't know, even I'm having a hard time sort of describing it. But one of the lines that I think about to this day is when she wakes up and she's like, "Is it tomorrow?" And he's like, "Well, in the context of yesterday, then yes." And I was like, that's so horrible. And I'm wondering, one of the questions I have is, do these people even know what they're doing to one another? Like,
Yeah, yeah.
I feel like Danny may be aware of some things, but does he know he's gaslighting her? Does she know that this is gaslighting? If she knew, would she get out of this relationship? Like, if Danny's family hadn't died, would he have left her behind? Like, it's just, there are a lot of questions that, because the relationship is not as explored as it could be, we don't have enough information to make a decision. And these are questions I probably shouldn't have, because it's not that deep, because it's just a movie, but it's things that I was curious about. And I still found, with all the gaslighting being so over the top, by the time you get to the end and see all of the quote unquote disturbing imagery,
Yeah.
I was just like,
Who's
okay,
on
so
fire
what?
now? Who's lit up now, right?
Yeah, I was like, so what? I was like, I've never seen so many people squirming and moving and shaking in their chairs during those scenes where Will Poulter would say something outrageous, or he would say something outrageously ridiculous to her. And it's like the things that gaslighting can do on your mental state, the effect that has on your mental state. And it was like, what's the point of getting high when you're already disturbed? And yeah, it was just a lot going on.
Yeah,
So
I think the movie, like, it gives us at least a glimpse into the boyfriend's character too. Like when he's like, "Oh, I have a thesis idea. It's your idea. What are you talking about? Like, why are you being mad at me for stealing your idea?" Like, it is this sort of like defensive, like, white guy thing, I guess, too, where he assumes he could just like have the world shaped the way he wants it. And like, that's it. I think that whole subplot kind of shows like who he is as a character, right? He may even realize what he's doing is wrong, and what's his name, William Jackson Harper's character calls him out on that, because he's being so anxious about it, during that whole scene. This guy just basically has never been called out on his bullshit, and he's kind of coasted through life in this way of like making people conform to his needs and his desires. I found that kind of fascinating. I wish maybe more had happened there, and more with William Jackson Harper, because I love that man so much.
Let's talk briefly about the very end of the film. And I think one of the things that has been interesting is to see the reaction that people have to the end. In particular, if you read interviews that Jack Rayner has given. So Jack Rayner plays Christian, Danny's boyfriend in the film. And when I read interviews with him, it seems as though he barely grasps what he has participated in. Like, he is.
You mean I'm the bad guy?
He is deeply upset by the ending of this film and how it is received. Right, like I think there's a story of like how he was at a screening and he said, how many people think that Christian deserves what he gets? And like a lot of people in the audience like clap or raise their hand, and he is absolutely horrified by that, because you are pointing out some of the things that he's done, like the thing with the thesis, and there's also like Jack Rayner literally like went through the movie and like identified like all the things that he did bad. Right, so for instance, the thing about stealing the thesis, that was one thing, and he's that part when the people were accused of stealing the book, right? And he
Oh
says,
yeah.
"Oh well, those people aren't our friends at all. You know, like we don't know them at all."
He's
Like
so fast about that.
He disowns his
Wow.
friends basically. But aside from those few things, there's and obviously the things you point out, Valerie, like that could be construed in a number of ways. How, the relative toxicity of the relationship. He doesn't feel like the guy is. The guy might not be an awesome dude, but he is not worthy necessarily of being paralyzed by this chemical and then burned alive in a bear costume. Yeah, I mean, what did you make of that ending? You know, the very ending scene where Danny looks on as all these people are consumed in the flames. Did you have any? Were you feeling like, yeah, like, you know, she's getting hers, or were you horrified at the whole situation? Valerie, what are your thoughts?
Oh no, I wasn't horrified at all. I was like, good for her, and not
Yeah. Yeah.
necessarily at not necessarily at the expense of other people, because I really wish it hadn't been that way.
Mm.
But if he had treated her better, he wouldn't have been sewn up in that bear, you know. And I think that it was a release. I think this tribe, this group of people, just took on whatever grief Danny was feeling
Mhm.
in that time, and just sort of acted it out along with her. And then when she finally got her act together and she like smiled, it was like, okay, so this is like the release that we've all been looking for, because we've all been on this journey with her. And, we want better for this woman who seems to be a sweet, smart lady who hasn't really done anything wrong. And we want better for her. So they, when all of her troubles and grief burn up, she can start over.
Yeah.
That was pretty much, because when you look at all the flowers and everything, all of that means rebirth. Life, and the circle of life and all that. So I saw it as a fresh start. I've been looking and doing research on what the bear means in Swedish tradition, but I haven't come up with anything super substantial. But I was wondering if the bear was just like an isolated thing, or could it have been a goat, or whatever. If the bear was something that's like specific. And I look at, when I look at films, I always look for, like, I look at films like a research paper, which is kind of weird for most people, but I'm like, I always look at little things and I'm like, does this have meaning? Ways that I can sort of figure out. And the bear thing was interesting, was
Mhm.
something I wanted to figure out. However, I didn't like I just had a problem with the way the people of color were disposed of.
Oh yeah.
It was just, well, first of all, believing that people of color would even travel to something like this was just not, it was
Yeah.
just weird. And I was thinking that I wished that this movie was like all white people, because in this context, it would make perfect sense.
For sure. For sure.
Because, I just,
Because the people of color would have GTFO'd almost immediately, right?
Oh yeah. Well, at least I mean
like,
the smart ones
immediately.
pretty much did. The smart ones were trying to, and then they were like, yeah, oh well.
No, I don't think it would have even gotten to that point. I think most people would have gotten
Yeah.
in there, saw all of those white people, and been like, "Well,
Yeah,
I
you want me to
got
hike 12 hours to this like a weird commune with no communication to the outside world? Like, yeah,
to
this is
go
not
hang
a
out with
great
white
sell.
folks." Yeah, I don't think so.
Yeah.
So that was a part of it that was like, and then like just to see William Harvey's leg like upside down, like it just like they it was just weird. And so that was the element of the film that I just didn't like at all. And where you see a film like Hereditary, where it takes place, both films take place in modern day, but Hereditary is a little bit more connected to a reality that may be lived every day. And so in that film is where I expected to see a little bit more people of color.
Yeah.
Not in this one.
Fair
It's really
enough.
sort of fantasy and sort of disconnected from reality. I just thought that was weird.
A few other things about the ending I want to point out that I quite enjoyed. Y'all were talking about how like there was no single image or moment that really stuck out to you. Actually, there was one for me. Thinking back on the movie, there is one moment in this movie that truly horrified me, and that I'm going to be thinking about for years. Like I will not be able to get this image out of my head for years. Any idea what it is? Any guesses what it is? By any chance?
Does it involve a smashed head?
No, no.
Really?
It was
So
not.
you talking about the spread eagle?
Yes.
Blood eagle.
It's
Blood eagle.
so there's this moment when Christian
yeah.
goes into a shack, and this other guy has been inflicted on what's called blood eagle, which is, according to Wikipedia, a ritualized method of execution where they basically take the person's lungs out the back of his body, and he's still breathing, so he's still like alive.
That was the detail that was, I thought.
That's pretty good. That was
so
like a Hannibal,
awesome.
Tableau or something.
That was such an awesome detail because, it could have been hanging out his body, like whatever, but it was still.
He was still breathing. And so then it's like, okay, so is the guy, is he feeling pain and he just can't move because he's been paralyzed? Like, the concept of that scene is going to stick with me forever. Like, I'm never going to get that out of my head. So that was really terrifying. Another thing that I actually quite appreciated about the end of the movie is I have never taken mushrooms before in my life, but I have read online that the depiction of taking mushrooms in this movie is quite true to life. Like, it is a very accurate depiction of what it is like to take mushrooms. And there's many visual effects shots that are very subtle, like basically Danny's flowers, right, that she's wearing at the end of the movie are all alive, right? I don't know if it's clear, but like they're all moving and breathing with her. And I thought that was like a really effective stylistic moment. So we should give props to the movie that it apparently does a good job of capturing the experience of taking mushrooms. So I just want to shout that out.
Props for that, I guess. This is certainly a movie I can't wait to rewatch because there is so much detail in the setting and the imagery and everything that I really want to drink in again. Maybe I'll be fast forwarding it to really get to the good parts.
Just fast forward to the blood eagle part.
I really, really enjoyed the. I don't know how to describe it, but there was something about the synchronized movements of the group.
Yeah.
That I really enjoyed, like when they sat at the table and then one person would eat and then they'd all pick up their utensils one after the other. Or, I really enjoyed like the comedic moment, especially like after the two sacrificed themselves and these, the people from the UK were like screaming and the lady was standing beside them like, what's the problem? What's going on? Like, after two people just died or whatever. It's just, the little, like, this group of people, whoever those actors are, were great. Like, they really, I don't know where he found this group of people, but they all worked in unison really well together. And this dance and everything, like, everything was just really well choreographed. And the way that those scenes were shot were just, I don't know, they were gorgeous.
Mm-hmm.
And, like, Ari Aster is really an accomplished, confident director, and at least there's that element to me.
Agreed 100%. I feel exactly the same way about the direction.
I wonder what it would look like if someone else wrote something and he directed it. I wonder.
I think that would be interesting. Any closing thoughts from you, Devindra?
I will say I just rewatched the original Wicker Man, just to get into the mood for this review, the Robin Hardy film. And, there's certainly a lot of parallels. I think both in the same way, both films just kind of end with the like a very elaborate sacrifice. And we don't move on beyond that. And I think that's kind of interesting. I kind of want more. I kind of want to know, like, okay, I like the final. Is the final shot of her smiling? Is that where we cut to black?
Yeah, I think
or one of the final shots.
Although it's a very, it doesn't feel like it's completely 100% triumphant. It feels like there's a mixed smile there.
There's very much a what next thing going on with this movie. It's like, so is she leader of this cult now? Like, what's up? What's going on? But yeah, both this and Wicker Man kind of end with the sacrifice in a way, and just that's it. That's the movie. deal with it, and I kind of appreciated that at least.
All right, all right. Well, I think we can end it there, Valerie, unless you have any closing thoughts. But I think
I was gonna say I don't think Ari Aster has ever been about closure.
Yeah.
I think you just have to deal with the cards you're dealt, and I kind of dig it. I actually dig that. It's like you go ahead and you figure it out on your own. You know, is the devil's 10th henchman coming back to Earth, and now is she the May Queen or is she allowed to leave? Like, you know what I mean? It's a really I like ending on cliffhangers. I think that
Hmm.
that's pretty cool. So
all right.
overall, I enjoyed the movie. I did. I liked a lot of things about it. It just, you know, it's not perfect. So
And we should just acknowledge, like, it's great to see, like, horror movies this year have been a consistent source
Hmm.
of original, interesting storytelling.
Yeah.
Right.
Between this and us, like
This,
this year's a
us,
bounty.
I
Yeah.
haven't seen Crawl, but I've heard that's great. Alex
Oh
Aja's new
man.
movie. And in an era where the vast majority of all movies at the multiplex are Marvel films or Disney films, it's been great to get some variety, even in the form of movies like Midsommar. So let's wrap it up there. You can find more episodes of this podcast at slashfilmcast.com. Email us at slashfilmcast@gmail.com. Our spoiler bumper comes from filmmaker Kyle Hillinger. Our theme song comes from AdamWarrock.com. This episode was produced by Beatty Zhang. Stay tuned to hear what we'll be discussing next week on the podcast. But in the meantime, Valerie Complex, where can people find more of your work on the internet this week?
well, you can find me on Twitter at Valerie Complex and Instagram at Valerie_complex. And I just wrote actually one of my most recent pieces was for Slash Film, where I talk about queer tropes in LGBTQ cinema that need to retire. And my most recent article is for Pride.com, where I talk about 5 queer movies that are harmful to the LGBT community, or I guess the depiction of queerness in those films is harmful portrayals. I don't even remember the title of the article. That's terrible. But that's where my most recent work is to date.
Is it the 5 really bad LGBTQ movies to avoid at all costs? Is that the one?
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
Well, we will link to both of those in the show notes so people can find them, okay?
Thank you so much.
Great to have you on. Devindra Hardawar, where can people find more of your work on the internet?
Oh yeah, I'm on Twitter at Devindra. I write about tech at Engadget.com. I'm also doing a tech podcast at nomortech.net, and I just restarted that. I guess that's season 2, and my brother came on for an episode, so go listen to that.
Find all of my stuff at davechen.net/letters, which is where you can sign up to receive emails from me. Follow me on Twitter at DaveChensky. That's DaveChen, SKY. Next week, we'll be discussing The Lion King. The Lion King. The new Lion King movie. That is not, it's not live action. It's not animated. It's something in between. So tune in for that. Thanks for listening. We'll see you later. All right, we're still broadcasting, but I'm just going to leave it rolling because we're going to record the next section next. Valerie, thanks so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, it was great.
Hope you had a good time.
Thank you for having me. I had a good time. I know that gosh, I'm bad with names. I know that Jacob.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Jacob Hall.
He wanted me to write about the Bach-Eye connection, but I just couldn't get the article out in time before San Diego Comic-Con. Because God, I just couldn't put any more pressure on myself than I already have going out there.
Understood.
But maybe when it comes out on DVD, I can write about it, because I'm telling you, it's all there.
Yeah, that sounds good. And I haven't seen anybody bring that up, so yeah, I would love it's definitely original.
I would love to read it. So
and it does play out. Midsommar does play out like a Greek tragedy.
Mm-hmm.
Woman is in grief, and gets back at her, significant other for the betrayal or whatever. Yep. It's very Greek tragedy. So,
all right. Well, Valerie, thanks for joining us, and we will be watching out for what you produce next.
Yep.
Thank you so much for having me. Looking forward to writing for the site soon.
Cool. All right. Have a good night. Bye.
Have a good night.
Bye-bye.
All right, I'm going to run to the bathroom.
All right.
Be right back.
People in
Yep.
the live chat room will be taking a quick break. We'll be back in like a few minutes, record the first part of the episode. Still waiting for Devendra to come back.
I'm back.
Okay, there you go. All right, I got a couple Spider-Man emails to read.
Cool.
But I think we can keep this pretty short. Ready?
Yes.
All right, here we go. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Slash Filmcast. I am David Chen, and joining me today is...
Devendra Hardawar.
It's just the two of us, Devendra, just you and me. The two Deuterinos.
As the song goes. I don't know the rest of the lyrics, but just imagine that playing throughout this episode.
Yeah, just the two of us. Now, why you might ask, why are there only two people on this episode of the podcast? And that is because on today's episode of the Slash Filmcast, we are going to be reviewing Ari Aster's new movie, Midsommar, with Valerie Complex. Really grateful to her for joining us on today's review portion of the episode. And when Jeff Kanata found out that we were going to be reviewing Midsommar, he said, hey, can I please not watch this movie?
Yeah.
And I thought that was a pretty reasonable reaction.
Yeah.
Because
we actually just heard footsteps running away and Jeff's car driving away while we were all recording. That's what happened.
Yeah. And I do not begrudge anyone for not wanting to see Midsommar, because it is, I think even people who like the movie would agree that it is a grueling experience. You know, it is 2.5 hours long and filled with some of the most brutal imagery I've seen in quite some time in a horror film. So
Fun date movie. Yeah.
yeah, didn't someone tweet at us, Devendra, saying that they saw it as a date, or they brought their mom?
They
to
brought
see
their
it or
mom.
something? Someone brought
Yeah,
their mom
which
to
is-
see it. Yeah.
To be honest, I'd probably watch this movie with my parents. Like it'd be the sort of thing they'd be into as well. I have taken it upon myself to warn people, like people at my office and coworkers who don't really pay attention to what movies are, that this is not a date movie. Like I think that's a fair warning for anybody, right?
Yeah.
Not the best thing to see if you're in a young or new relationship, or if you're in a relationship that
And
maybe a little
definitely
rocky.
not a thing to see if you're in a struggling relationship. This is not the shot in the arm that your relationship needs to survive.
Yeah.
Do not see Midsommar with someone who you even slightly question how good the relationship is going.
There are a lot of tweets out there about people, like the after movie conversations
Yes.
with couples,
Yes.
and like it's harsh. It sounds bad.
It's harsh. Anyway, so we're gonna do some emails, some what we've been watching, and then conclude with an in-depth review of Midsommar with Valerie Complex. You can find more episodes of this podcast at slashfilmcast.com. You can also email us at slashfilmcast@gmail.com. I want to read a couple of emails. I've been loving these emails people have been writing in. In the past, I've not read the emails because they've been spoilery for the movie. But you know what? Over time, I've just stopped caring as much. So here's what I'm going to say. Spoilers for Spider-Man Far From Home. If you don't want to be spoiled, you should skip ahead. We'll put a timestamp where what we've been watching, where that begins. So you can just skip ahead to there. Yeah, we got some interesting emails. This one comes in from Tyler. So again, spoilers for Spider-Man Far From Home. This email comes from Tyler, writing into /filmcast@gmail.com. Quote, I have a problem with Spider-Man Far From Home that ultimately soured this experience without completely ruining it. Overall, I had a lot of fun, but there was a piece of Mysterio's justification that truly bothered me and made me take a look at my expectations of villains in his movies. Mysterio and his band of disgruntled ex-employees hatched this plot essentially to fool the world, become the next Avenger, and or destroy Tony's legacy, whatever. I don't have so much of a problem with this, but the fact that these ordinary, well-qualified people in science who happen to be fired from their previous jobs are just okay murdering kids with drones does not compute with me. The jump they make from being non-lethal mischief masters to being cool with gunning down kids seemed way too far of a gap for my mind to cross. I also think it triggered me since I'm an HR professional. Are we supposed to expect that it's so easy to believe that disgruntled ex-employees are just down to do this? I also thought the people on his team looked nice and for the most part harmless, which didn't help me buying in, end quote. So, yeah, I mean, Mysterio's motivations are lightly explored in Spider-Man Far From Home, and I think
he's angry. He's a very angry man.
The motivations of his henchmen are even less well explored. And
listen, those stock options are worthless now. What are they going to do? Yeah,
I mean, this does get to a common issue in any kind of blockbuster action movie, which is the henchmen or hench people, I guess would be the correct gender neutral term. Like, what is their motivation? You see people who are risking lives to save the people they work for, and it's like, really, has villain X really inspired that much loyalty? In fact, even one of the Marvel films comments on this. I think there's a moment in Iron Man 3 where Tony's about to blast some dude, and the guy he holds his hands up and he cries uncle, basically. He's like, dude, I just started working here, and runs away. I feel like it's just a common problem that hopefully the movie glosses over it well enough that you don't think about it. But in general, yeah, these hench people, they in most movies they're willing to kill people, sacrifice their lives, sacrifice other people's lives, all to back up what is usually not a very savory person in the form of their boss.
Mm-hmm.
Listen,
it's all a metaphor for making a movie with a really demanding director. That's what it all is.
Indeed. We also had David Spencer in LA write in to /filmcast@gmail.com about Mysterio's motivation. Commenting on this very fact, he says here, motivations: Warmonger, Whiplash, Ross, whatever Guy Pearce's name was, Yellow Jacket, Goliath, I don't really remember Ant-Man and the Wasp, and now Mysterio. All of them have the exact same motivations. My rich boss stole my idea or cut me out without giving me proper credit. Now I'm mad about it. When people complain about Marvel movies being samey, this is one of the major elements I think that causes it. This and Skybeams. I'm a major MCU fan. My wedding was literally Marvel-themed. And I've especially loved the latest wave of films because I felt like they're finally breaking out of the criticisms people had in phases 1 and 2. And yet, here we have another guy who's mad at Tony Stark for being a dick. He doesn't feel like a foil to our hero, representing conflicting ideas and forcing the protagonist into tough decisions like Killmonger, Thanos, or Ego. He just wants to kill this kid because he got drones from Tony. The toast scene felt so hokey to me because it felt like they wanted to retcon scenes that had no intention of setting up a character like Mysterio. I don't know if Doctor Strange 2 will ever come out, but if it does, and if Mordo is the villain, it will be an arc that is actually developed. This is not character development. This is a set of motivations that have been used too many times, end quote. And actually, Dan Gvosdin, our guest last week, actually defended this. He wrote an email to us. He said, quote, what I enjoyed so much about Mysterio was not that he's an aggrieved employee of Stark's. out for revenge, but how he intends to utilize Stark's legacy on the world for his revenge and eventual gain. It isn't just meta that he's dressing as both are and the denizens of the MCU's idea of what a hero looks like and performing as such. It is narratively satisfying as well. It frames Peter's conflicts over who should wield power in a new way, suggesting that the impression of heroism isn't really enough, and that Tony knew that at Peter's core was a good person actually worthy of it. It deals with the power vacuum after the results of Endgame in an interesting way, essentially weaponizing it, including on a personal level for Peter, who at one point has to deal with the holographic zombie memory of his mentor, end quote. So I thought that was a great, an interesting defense of the Mysterio motivation. Devindra, did you have any concerns with Mysterio's motivations, or do you feel like these villains are getting too samey at this point? What do you think?
I mean, I think it's more how he went about, being disgruntled about Tony Stark. It is a movie that kind of takes the whole idea of superheroes and sort of meme culture and a lot of things too. Like he just wants to be famous on the level of like his favorite YouTube star. Eric, in their world, the YouTube stars are superheroes. Like I found that all really intriguing. I think any of these movies, if you really dig down to the motivations of the villains and their henchmen, it probably doesn't work out so well.
Mm. Well, thank you so much for all of the emails to /filmcast@gmail.com, and appreciate the engagement as always. Devindra, why don't we get into some what we've been watching this week?
Sure.
I had a chance to check out this movie called I Love You Now Die. Have you heard of this movie?
You mean the series?
No, it's an HBO documentary series. I guess it's a series. It's 2 films.
Yeah.
Directed by Erin Lee Carr. Erin Lee Carr is an extremely accomplished documentary film director. She's made films like At the Heart of Gold, Inside the USA Gymnastics Scandal. She's also made Mommy, Dead, and Dearest, which is tells the same story that The Act on Hulu, not fictionalized. This is like kind of does a dramatic reenactment of. And she's also an author as well. But she's the daughter of David Carr, the late New York Times media columnist. And so I'm a big fan of her work, and she recently just debuted this documentary called I Love You Now Die, which is about the case of Michelle Carter. You know about this case about Michelle Carter and Conrad Roy?
Yeah, I remember. It was a big deal. It was a big deal in terms of media. What is the internet doing to kids today? I also saw part of this. I thought most of the first episode too. Yeah.
So short version of the story is that Michelle Carter and Conrad Roy were like boyfriend girlfriend. They were in a romantic relationship that was largely took place online via thousands of texts. And Conrad Roy was very depressed and wanted to kill himself. And Michelle Carter, as the media told the story, egged him on, right? And we should say that, I'm going to briefly discuss suicide here. So, if this is a trigger for you, feel free to skip ahead. But yeah, at one point in his actual existence, Conrad Roy, got into a car and started filling it with carbon monoxide, and then couldn't deal with it, and got out of the car, and then texted Michelle and was like, I can't do it, and Michelle was like, get back in that car, and then he did get back in the car, and he ended up dying. And the question is, how culpable was Michelle Carter? How much to blame was she for this person's suicide? And to read the press reports, I mean, even just the story I just relayed.
Yeah, doesn't sound very good.
Sounds like a horrible person. Sounds like a pretty terrible human being who does not deserve our sympathy at all. And as usual, the real-life situation is much more complex. And I think the movie I Love You Now Die does a pretty good job of unraveling this extremely complicated story and presenting an even-handed telling of both sides that I think is going to be very valuable, particularly for something like this where it is so easy for the media to sensationalize something like this. It's so easy to just annihilate any nuance in this story. And I think that a movie or documentary like I Love You Now Die does a great job of adding more nuance, of adding complexity to a situation that I think sorely needs it. So I would strongly recommend this documentary, which is available right now on HBO. If you want to learn more about this case, if you want to explore it more, that's I Love You Now Die. It's directed by Aaron Lee Carr. That's what I've been watching this week. Devindra, what about you? What have you been watching?
David Chen, you have seen Face Off many times, right?
I think I have seen Face Off is not an accurate
way
you live
of describing. You live and breathe Face Off.
I think I am not exaggerating. I think I've seen Face Off more than any other film in my entire life.
Oh, wow.
I think I've seen Face Off like probably 15 times is my guess.
Okay.
And you have to understand, like, this is like when I was coming of age as a movie lover.
Yeah. Same.
And like,
same.
You know, huge fan of John Woo. And like, this was John Woo's first, like, really very, very successful American film. I mean, he
made several. But
he
they
made
weren't
Broken Arrow
great.
and Hard Target, but like, this was like the first breakout success. I feel that like really felt to me like the perfect synthesis of John Woo's style and American action film, American action filmmaking. I thought.
Okay, all those things are true. I echo your feelings, Dave.
Yep.
But have you ever seen Face Off staged live, performed in Roman times, written in iambic pentameter?
No, I have not. And let me just say, it really does kill me that many of you had a chance to see this and I did not.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. This crazy thing happened at Prospect Park in Brooklyn this weekend called Cage in the Park, which is a live performance of Face Off with everything I described by two.
We should say that
Daily
it's
Show.
Typically like Shakespeare in the Park, right? So
Well, I mean, it's a riff on Shakespeare in the Park.
Right,
Yes, like
right.
that's the whole thing. I think their riff is like this is going to be the 61st annual Cage in the Park. They just want to be one more than Shakespeare in the Park or something. But it's by two Daily Show employees, a producer and a writer, and it's basically that whole concept, a live performance of Face Off. I think I've never seen Point Break live, but I think it may be similar to that, except this feels more like a live stage show, and it's pretty insane. It recounts all the best moments of the film, like everything you'd remember. I tweeted the entire opening, the opening minute, the opening seconds of Face Off, where you see John Travolta hanging out. Is it a merry-go-round? In a merry-go-round with his child, with his son, and sniper Nicolas Cage in the background shoots John Travolta, shoots his son, kills his son. Opening of Face Off. That's all depicted here. It's great. It's hilarious. I think it distills everything that is so good about Face Off. The two actors, I don't have their names in front of me. But I think the actors do a great job of channeling the wilder parts of Travolta and Cage's performances, especially the actor who did Nicolas Cage. I mean, how can you not like really just revel in being Nicolas Cage in one of the greatest Nicolas Cage movies ever? It's a really funny thing. Like it was also, it's just so wild. Like honestly, this thing happened 5 minutes from my house in this like columned building we have in Prospect Park that is normally just empty. Like it's normally just a place where people have like birthday parties and stuff. It's kind of a crumbling old Coliseum type looking thing with big columns. And they staged it there. It was just filled with movie nerds. I met some folks. I met a listener. I met Hoi Chen Bui for the first time, slash film writer, because she lives in New York. I just have not run into her at all. And this is these are the cool things. Like these are the things that make me really enjoy living in New York. This thing was co-produced by the Alamo Drafthouse here. So it was just like a great community thing of people gathering together on a hot summer day to revel in their love of Face Off. And I really enjoyed it. They may be turning this thing into some sort of a production eventually. I feel like this is a test run. It's certainly, they have to tighten up the performance a bit. I think they let some great lines kind of just go by too much. Like there's they're talking about Cage's character is talking about he can eat grapes for hours, and I feel like you could really just like revel in that line a little more. There's the what a predicament towards the end, and it just kind of passes by. I want those moments to be glorified and championed.
How dare these actors not give these lines the glory that they deserve?
Well, it's also more the play. The play has to give room around those lines, you know,
Right,
to like
right, right.
really let them land. So it's things like that. I think at points it kind of devolves into people like shouting and just swearing at each other. But I think the performance is really funny. There was an introduction and like a commentary by somebody playing John Woo in a leather jacket and a halter top. So like it was fun. It was hilarious. Like it is a pure distillation of my love of John Woo and Face Off and all that. I wish you were here for this, Dave.
Yeah, I mean, it combines two of my favorite things in the world: Face Off and Shakespeare. And it clearly
Yeah.
was made by like I got to experience it through Instagram stories that some of you had shared, and I'm like, man, I really wish I was there for that. I hope it becomes a full production. Is it still running now, or is it one-time event?
I mean, it was just two. They just ran two things at this free space. You know, like there's very little money involved in this whole thing. I think the Alamo Drafthouse like covered like most of the costumes or something. It was just like a great ragtag thing though, which is what I kind of love about it. Yeah, and people who were just like walking by in the park would wander in and like wonder what the hell is going on. There was a mariachi band concert like right next to it, so they had to like compete with that and sort of incorporate it into the show too, which was kind of funny. Live theater, man, live theater.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Man, you know, speaking of movies that like I don't feel are super culturally relevant these days, I feel like Face Off. You know, that's a movie that I basically memorized the entire movie, and I guess the thing is the movie is really goofy. You know what I mean? Like
It's super goofy.
when I
Super
saw
goofy,
it,
but
when I saw it as a kid, it's like that, like the way that the face switching is depicted in the movie. I'm like, oh, that seems like the thing that could actually happen.
this is fine.
That seems like it's possible. But then you grow up and you realize, like, no, that's ridiculous. Like, none of that's possible. It doesn't make any sense whatsoever.
Well, listen, the Mission Impossible series wouldn't have like the prevalent face-offing as they would without Face-Off, right? Or was
maybe.
MI1 before the movie? I forget now.
I think.
But I think like
you're thinking of Mission Impossible 2, probably, right?
well, two and also all the other movies like face-offing is a big thing, and surely Wu like made it a big element in two just because I think he loves the concept or something.
I don't know.
But,
I don't know. I don't know
this
that
movie is so
face-offing-
culturally relevant.
Yeah, I mean, I will always have a soft spot in my heart for that movie. Although it is it's a pretty silly movie. It's a pretty silly movie,
Yeah.
like looking back on it. But I did
Gotta
love it.
embrace the silliness.
I think the one thing that I really felt like sold me on this production in the park was when I saw this Instagram story of somebody singing "Somewhere Over the Rainbow."
Yeah, I tweeted that. I tweeted that
yeah.
whole section. So the shootout that happens like towards the end of the movie with Somewhere Over the Rainbow playing is a giant sword fight, and it works.
It's just
great.
like what, like this person, whoever conceived of this clearly loves the DNA of Face Off. You know.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's Cage
Also
in the
crazy.
Park, and I will forever regret not having been able to attend.
Yeah, it's written up on Slash Film. You can check out the details and stuff there. Hopefully, they'll be able to produce this somewhere. Like, I'm sure this would be huge in LA. Like, this could be the next Point Break Live, I guess.
It feels like it's like watching. You know, remember that movie, Be Kind Rewind? This like the Michel Gondry like Sweeting movies. It feels like some version of that almost.
It is.
Yeah.
It's a remixed version of this movie in all the right and wrong ways.
Devindra, what else have you been watching?
I also caught the first episode of From the Earth to the Moon. And do you remember the series, Dave?
Yeah, it came out like a couple decades ago.
20
Like,
years ago, 98.
20 years ago. Yeah.
So HBO went ahead and remastered the whole thing. It used to be streaming on HBO Go and Now, but it was like, I believe it was just standard def. They remastered it into high def. It looks amazing, and I believe all of this is like leading up to the Apollo 11 like anniversary, right? So
it is a documentary about is it a documentary?
It is. There's documentary footage, but it's also like a dramatized series. It's very weird, and it has like introductions by Tom Hanks, like late 90s Tom Hanks, who looks just like very young. I think this was a project Tom Hanks and Ron Howard and Brian Grazer and everybody, like that whole crew wanted to do it after Apollo 13 to kind of tell the whole story of the of the space missions, of the moon landing and everything kind of surrounding it. And this is a series like it goes across like dramatized sections, newsreel footage, some documentary stuff. It's a really weird mix of things. Tom Hanks directed the first episode too, which is kind of a strange thing to see. But there's a lot of good stuff here. First of all, like the actors you see, like Stephen Root pops up. I forget, Bryan Cranston is in this thing. Carrie Elwes is in this thing. Like people playing like notable astronauts and people working at NASA. I think it gets the drama really well done. And honestly, it is the perfect thing to watch if you want to like believe in an America that can kind of do things again, and not a country where whatever our president is tweeting is tweeting. Like it is a nice mental refresh. It's sort of like rewatching The West Wing or something. Like it reminds me of what our country could be. So it's kind of fun. The remaster is good, and I think it's worth a watch. I saw some of this like back in high school. I think like we were watching it in science class or something. So I've never seen this whole series. So now seems like the perfect time, and it's certainly a good accompaniment to like First Man or something like that.
Well, another accompaniment is the documentary Apollo 11.
Yes, yeah.
Which I think has recently aired on CNN, if I'm
Oh,
not
wow.
mistaken, or TV. So it's available to get on television if you have like DVR or something like that.
And there are like the DVD and it's on demand. There were some screenings again, like somebody.
Yeah, to celebrate, yeah.
Yeah.
But that is a great film. It essentially tells the story of Apollo 11 using only recently unearthed documentary footage. So like, there's no talking head interviews, there's no actor reenactments. It's just the footage from the event, which is really impressive. How they are able to like string together all this footage to create a coherent and thrilling narrative. So
and mostly like glorious 70 millimeter footage too. Like it looks insane.
I mean, there is footage that was shot back then that looked beautiful on an IMAX format screen.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Like that's how impressive it was. So highly recommended. And yeah, From the Earth to the Moon as well is available. Is it streaming on HBO? I'm not sure.
It is streaming as of today. It
Okay,
just
as of
restarted streaming today with the remastered version. And I'm going to be writing up like something like the best things to watch to celebrate Apollo for Engadget. So all of this is going to be on there for sure.
Cool. Well, that's From the Earth to the Moon and Apollo 11. Two things worth checking out. That's what we've been watching this week. Before we get to our review of our Midsommar, Ari Aster's new movie with Valerie Complex, we want to thank all the people who donated to the podcast this week. Thanks to donor Jamie from Decatur, Georgia, who writes in, just wanted to have Decatur properly represented and pronounced. Thanks, Dave Chen. Shout out to fellow Atlantan, Devindra. Keep up the good work, guys. P.S. Shout out to Jeff Canada for We Have Concerns. I still listen to old episodes all the time. And John from Decatur, let's go to Twain's and talk about movies. So that comes from Jamie. I think Jamie is trying to pass a message on to John from Decatur, who donated recently as well. So,
friends
John,
make you friends.
Yeah. Friends making friends via the donation section of the /filmcast.
Oh, good. I'm not in Atlantan, but my family's there, so I'm always over there. Yeah, it's cool.
We also got this donation from Mike Aparicio from Oak Park, Illinois, who writes in to say, "Hey guys, letting you know that season 2 of Dark is out on Netflix." And I'm going to pause here for a second and say that Mike Aparicio actually donated when season 1 came out.
Yeah,
and he said, "Hey, I'm donating this so that you will watch Dark." And he donated quite a hefty sum. And now he follows that up by saying this. "Hey guys, letting you know that season 2 of Dark is out on Netflix. I'm only donating a third as much this time, since as far as I can tell, only Dave took me up on watching season 1, and only months after months of constant Twitter abuse. Dark season 2 is currently sitting at 94% on Rotten Tomatoes, in case you don't want to take my word for it. Thanks for many years of entertainment. Keep up the great work." That comes in from Mike Aparicio. Yeah, I mean, I agree. I'm taking this donation all for myself, is what I'm saying, is what the impression I'm getting, because I'm the only person who lived up to that side of the bargain of watching Dark Season 1. Devindra, how many episodes of Dark Season 1 are you into?
I saw 2 episodes. It was good. It just couldn't keep going.
It's
compared to everything
a show
else.
You really need to work at. It takes a lot of work, you know?
Yeah.
So
based on, I saw some stuff from the trailer season 2, which looked really cool, and is kind of motivating me to kind of catch up to see what all that is about. So I'm probably going to do that soon.
I would highly recommend Dark Season 1. I have not seen Dark Season 2 yet, but it is definitely on my to-do list. So thanks to Jamie from Decatur and Mike Aparicio from Oak Park, Illinois. Thanks also to new subscriber Alejandro Del Castillo for donating at the rate of $2 per month. If you want to contribute to the podcast, help us defray the costs of putting on the show, you can always go to paypal.me/filmcast. That's paypal.me/filmcast. Or go to slashfilm.com, use the /filmcast tab, and the PayPal links on the side of the page. Of course, we never want you to donate if it in any way causes you any hardship. And if that's your situation, hey, there's many ways to support us. Just leave a review for us on iTunes. It's completely free, and it really does help us out. So thanks so much to all the people who donated. Let's get to our review of Midsommar.